Hello, guys. My name is Brendan, and today we'll be deep diving into a short story. I've made a presentation that included visuals and quotes to help pull the story together and prove my point and open discussion about this story and the ethical dilemma from it. What would you justify doing to make yourself happy? That, among other questions, are presented in the short story, The Ones That Walk Away from Omelas. I found this to be quite an interesting story, and I'll be diving into the ethical considerations brought about by this piece of literature. So, a little bit about this story. It was written by Ursula Guin and was published in 1973, so it is a rather older story as it just turned 50 years old. The setting of the story is in a city named Omelas, which is what the title is named after, a beautiful, thriving city where all seems to be perfect. But as all stories seem to have, there is a dark secret in this city. Each of the citizens carries a piece of guilt with them as they all know the dark secret of Omelas. There is a child in the darkest basement of Omelas whose suffering, or rather lack of happiness, allows for every citizen in Omelas to live life in pure bliss. Nothing ever goes wrong in this city. There are never any droughts, never any diseases, all because of this singular child that suffers in this basement. To give you a good mental picture of what conditions the child lives in, I have a quote for you. The child is so thin that there are no calves to its legs. It lives on half a bowl of cornmeal and grease a day. It is naked. Its buttocks and thighs are a mass of festered sores, as it sits in its own excrement continually. So hopefully that gives you a good picture of what this child deals with. It lives in a little broom closet in the basement, and it has never never receives happiness. So this child is suffering, and everybody else is living in pure bliss. And I'm sure you might be asking yourself right now, is this right? How could this happen? What would I do in this situation? And this is where I really think this story becomes interesting. Because as much as we might say, oh, I would save the child if I was in the story, how hard would it be to do so if you knew that you would be giving up your happiness? I mean, just one for one, I'm sure there were a lot of people nowadays that would let another person suffer so that they could have complete happiness. But not only that, they have to give up the happiness of everyone else as well. So that puts that weight on top of it. So even though they know that it is morally wrong, they keep doing it. And that brings us into the ethical considerations of this story. So some of the major topics I'll be focusing on throughout the video are as listed below, and I'll be sharing what I've found in ethics as it relates to this short story. So the topics that I'll be covering in today's video will first start off with utilitarianism, we'll go to majority versus minority, ethical foundations, the trolley dilemma, and then finally finishing it off with ethical responsibility. So first off, we have utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory which determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. Now, in plain words, utilitarianism is basically deciding what is the correct ethical decision by weighing the outcomes of each side's argument. Now, the people of Omelas go through the process of using the utilitarianism, whether they realize it or not. They do this every day because they know that it is wrong since they experience remorse, but they also never have to imagine a world without being happy, which is quite the difficult trade off to make. This leaves the reader to think about how this society may parallel any societies today and how majority versus minority affects the real world. That brings me in my next point, which is majority versus minority. And here I have a quote from Le Guin. To exchange all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelas for that single small improvement, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the change of the happiness of one. So essentially, this explains the mental process that the citizens of Omelas work through each day. Majority versus minority also has a tendency to become an issue of powerful versus powerless. The powerful in this case being the majority, and the powerless being the child, which must suffer in the basement. So, with the power, the citizens must consider the pros and cons of the situation. The first pro is that they are always happy, but the con that comes with that fact is that they have in their subconscious this image of this child suffering each day. Another con is that they don't truly know what would happen if the child was left free. Most of the people at this point in the story were simply raised and, when they were at the correct age, told this secret, so they don't really know how it works or what would actually happen if they were to save the child. They also more than likely would assume that they couldn't get away free by saving the child and that there would be consequences involved. And finally, the last con relates to this situation is that they don't know if the citizens would just throw in another replacement child, leaving their work to be all for nothing. This goes back to the idea of utilitarianism. Clearly, there are many more cons to setting the child free, but do these cons outweigh the ethical and moral dilemma that the society is based on? That is the issue at hand. Now, I mentioned earlier that the story seems to try and parallel this fictional world with our real world issues. An example of that would be child labor and the issue of powerful versus powerless. In the article Exploitation of Child Labor and the Dynamics of Debt Bondage, Arnab K. Basu and Nancy H. Chow conclude that debt bondage turns out to be an important factor in the cycle of poverty and bonded child labor in agrarian economies. So, by exploiting debt owed, the people with power in poor agrarian societies force the powerless children to work to pay back their parents' debts. Not only does this lead to a cycle of poverty in which children are forced to work against their will, it also breaks many societal morals that are rights in other places in the world, such as America and other first world countries. These children are exploited at their expense, and the powerful live comfortably. So, to return back to the ethical discussion, there is another dilemma which has been discussed in many different forms, but today I'll be discussing the original trolley dilemma. In this situation, there is a runaway trolley that is headed towards a group of people that it will run over. But there is a switch that can be flipped to change its course to only kill one person. This dilemma, like I said, has been contemplated a lot, but one main takeaway from this problem is the doctrine of double effect, which is stated in a review and systematization of the trolley dilemma. The doctrine of double effect is as follows. There is a moral difference between the intentional harm as a means and the foreseen harm as a side effect. So, to relate this to the story, the people of Omelas could free the child and let everyone else in society suffer, or they could pull the switch and let the child suffer for their sake. According to this doctrine, the people of Omelas are morally wrong and should take accountability for their actions since they are choosing to pull the switch, which is intentionally causing harm. This leads me into my next point, which is ethical foundations. Essentially, on the outside, Omelas seems to be perfect, but the foundation of their society is deeply flawed. A quote from the story to show this is as follows. Often the young people go home in tears, or in a tearless rage, when they have seen the child and faced with this terrible paradox. So the strength of the community is deeply weakened since their happiness is built upon another's suffering. This leads to the moral repercussions that causes many people to have breakdowns and other mental issues. One such issue is self-doubt. They question the society they live in so much that they decide to leave Omelas entirely, hence the ones who walk away from Omelas. The option of walking away isn't presented until the end of the story, and it's told that almost no information is given about the land outside of Omelas. This brings us to the immoral intentions of these people. Even though they are not freeing the child, they are saying that they will not continue to live in a place that is built upon suffering, even if it means going into the unknown. The impact of this decision is larger since there is no knowledge about where they are headed. They are essentially making an ethically neutral decision since they are not helping the child, but they are making a point to leave with certain happiness. So, what ethical conclusions are to be drawn from this story? Well, there are many different options, but my main takeaway was ethical responsibility. And so now I want to open this up to discussion and what other people think. So, all in all, I believe this was a call to action by Ursula K. Le Guin. She's basically saying that we can't let the world that we live in affect the way that we live. So, the people in Omelas, they never really do anything to change their situation. All they do is they either stay or they walk away. And they never try to change the child's condition, they never try to help it out, they never try to free it. All they do is either deal with the moral repercussions while they live in the city, or they deal with them by leaving and we don't know what happens to them. So Ursula K. Le Guin is basically saying that we should not let this happen and we can't let this happen in today's society or there will be huge repercussions. And she's showing that through this story and that nothing is really right in the story. Everybody may be happy, but the downsides to that far outweigh the upsides, even though to the people that are happy, it doesn't seem that way. So I want to know what all of you think and what you would do if you were in this situation. So, all in all, I hope you liked my analysis. I hope you liked the video. It was a lot of work. Never made a video before, so probably really, really rough around the edges, but hope you enjoyed.